Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Decloak podcast. I'm joined with Greg Van Der Gaast. Hello, Greg. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. And for our audience, Greg is the ND of Sequoia Consulting, and we'll get an in-depth analysis of Greg and his career. And for those who don't know, Greg has an excellent career history, lots of career advice, and someone that I have spoken with on off over the past couple of years, and we've reconnected. So it's always good to see a friendly face, Greg. And then what we'll do is we'll jump straight in then. And give the audience a brief overview of you and your career.
Well, I've got to start at the beginning. And this is actually what, like professionally, I do a lot of public speaking now, and this is one thing to get approached for a lot, but it actually kind of irks me, but at least it gets you in the room. I started out as a teenage hacker, basically. Like I like to tell the story of when I was 15 or 16 years old, my sister brought home a VHS copy. I need more coffee. My sister brought home a VHS copy of the film Hackers. And obviously the main takeaway from that as a geeky 16-year-old is if you break into computers, you get to shag Angelina Jolie.
I love it.
As motivators go, it's all right. And then I kind of started fiddling and discovering with computers. We're talking like late 90s now. Yeah. And ended up breaking into a nuclear weapons facility, and then had guys in suits show up and make me a job offer I couldn't refuse. Quite adamant about the couldn't refuse part. Spent a few years working undercover for some agencies, doing some interesting stuff, but a lot of exposures to breaches, because this was before there were really any agencies focusing on that. So probably saw like 100+ breaches, 1,000+ kind of hackers that we were following and building intelligence on that kind of stuff. So you saw a bit more about the behaviors and how breaches were happening. And some of that has changed quite dramatically, and some hasn't really. But did that for a few years, and then I kind of went off into the world and became cybersecurity rock star, what I think a lot of people would aspire to, getting paid big money to implement all the latest, greatest security technologies. But after a few years, I wanted to make things better. I wanted to start. It was weird because initially I hated process. I hated documentation. I just wanted to play with the tech. And then I started we're not really maturing these implementations. So how do I make sure that we start doing this a bit more mature and consistent? Then you realize, a lot of our issues are actually in IT. So how do we influence IT so that stuff gets built properly, so we don't have to worry quite so much over here? And kind of following this constant thought process of where are the issues coming from? And it basically made me unemployable in the security industry. You fight fires at the end there. You don't actually go over here. Sorry, I'm getting my hands just in the corner of your frame. That's your editing problem, not mine.
That's fine. I'm sure we'll put some gimmick in there.
There you go. Just blur them out. Get AI to blur them out. And that kind of took me. I had some meanders actually. Some meandering. I stepped out of security for a few years, and then kind of came back into it out of obligation. Found myself very frustrated, very unemployable. A lot of politics. You get fired for solving problems a few times. Don't go work at Capita if you like solving problems. And weirdly, the last probably 3-4 years, really, I've started going in a very kind of different direction, way beyond the technology. The fundamental problem of security is not technology, and unless we take our eyes off that and actually start addressing the real root causes, we're not going to get there. Obviously, no one in security was interested in solving this problem at the source at all. And it's only really in the last kind of year that I realized, for all the talk of security people saying, leadership, executives, they don't understand risk, they don't understand security. It's actually, they deal with business risk day in, day out. They understand it very well. They have financial modeling around it, something that we don't. I've noticed that the traction I get talking to senior executives, so we're talking like CFOs, CEOs, chairmen, is significantly better than the ones I get in security circles. And that's kind of where I'm now. And that's what Sequoia aims to do. One of our taglines is we solve business problems, so you have fewer security problems. We just try to where are all your issues coming from, and address those things. And I deliberately wanted to sound nothing like an IT or cybersecurity company, so it sounds more like a PE or investment firm. And the first two letters are SE for security, and the second two letters are QU for quality, because I think we should be doing a lot more quality management and a lot just risk we think risk management is the right thing to do, but really you should only be managing residual risk. You should actually be reducing why you're introducing the risk in the first place, and then just only risk manage once it's no longer cost effective. We just keep adding on more and more risk management. We keep spending more money and we still can't keep up because we're never actually addressing the sources of these risks. And that's my career, basically.
I love it. I love it. And I think previous people I'd spoken with, they were like, you need to get Greg on, and we need to look at this and talk about that. And I think for me, someone that there's obviously a group of people that I think are really strong on this security influencer side, right? I hate that term. I think it's BS, right? But it's good to have people that are open. You'd spoken about stepping away from security. This is now becoming a major thing for people to they're either burnt out, mental health is kicking in, or again, frustration. Some people don't like to work around, monolithic processes or bureaucracy. And it's something that I'm assuming that you've learned to kind of navigate through. Obviously, you've created this company, and you're now speaking that business language, which I think helps unlock. So ultimately, if the people at the top you can translate and make things relatable to them, again, business risk is inherent to everything. But it's interesting you mentioned, through your career you'd been fired, and let's just say a conscious uncoupling, right? Everyone in their career will probably go through this, and there's absolutely no shame. I've seen many leaders across IT, cyber, whatever it may be, and sometimes they've been edged out for doing the right thing. How did you? I'm really interested in this, Greg. How did you handle that? Obviously you're working relentlessly, you're doing everything you can to do the right thing in an organization. Then the brakes are applied. How did you handle that?
Quite childishly and very angrily.
the ego takes an absolute kicking, I would imagine.
I mean, the last time it happened to me was with the Hut group here, but that was more an internal cultural issue. I mean, I was literally sat before my start date because they realized I wasn't going to play with the boy club, basically. But the other time it happened for actually doing work was when I first came to UK. I got hired by Capita to work on the TV licensing account for the BBC.
Boo.
And I remember I get so many angry letters, but it's not the Capita that says the angry letters. Like my television has literally never been connected. Like I just don't news or mainstream media. But it was interesting because I found out that I was the 10th person in post in 5 years. Like the average turnover was 6 months. And I think I was like 3 days on the job and actually called the BBC. And I was like, because I was looking at how we were operating, I was like, look, guys, I'm not even going to try and keep this ship afloat. I'm just going to let it slowly sink and build you something that floats on the shore. And the BBC was just kind of like, well, thanks for calling. You're the first person in 10 years who's been honest with us and has some semblance of a strategy. Would you like to come to Media City next, Thursday or whatever, and have some beers and burgers with us? So the customer relationship was immediately there. And 3 months in, actually a couple of weeks in, they'd mentioned, like, could you slow down a little bit? Because you're uncovering so much crap that we're worried Capita's going to fire you. And then 3 months later, it's actually the director of transition. He's like, from BBC, he called me up. He's like, listen, we're going to have a chat with your boss tomorrow, who is the divisional CISO, I think. I forget her exact title. And we're going to ask that you be promoted to report directly into the managing director because we think you're of strategic importance to the account. And I asked, okay, but what about that thing you said about, you're worried about them firing me because I'm exposing too many, issues. And his reply was, I'll say it verbatim, they couldn't possibly be that fucking stupid. They had the meeting and I got my P45 2 days later. So that was and I often make fun of security because I say, I think it's the only job in the world where no one knows what you're supposed to be doing. No one really knows whether you're actually doing it. And if you screw up bad enough, they triple your budget.
I know.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of this. There's a lot of this going on. And I've always wanted to kind of like increase the accountability and do a proper job. But I love to quote Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's right-hand man.
R.I.P.
One of my favorite quotes is that show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcomes. And if there's no accountability, there's no one understands, there's no transparency, there's no visibility, there's not a lot of accountability or motivation to really mature a security function, or to ever actually address the root cause, which would make us less necessary. But why is the business actually doing this? Because I'm no longer in team security people. I'm in team do the best thing for the business. And it's a bit worrying how often those things are in conflict nowadays.
And I would say if anyone has any recommendation strategies, whether we post this in Reddit or whatever, I always like hearing if people have ever cracked that proverbial walnut, because it's such a treacherous place to be in.
I want to say I have a little bit. First, I want to go back to another point, like the burnout. And I think part of the reason why we have burnout, and not just amongst CISOs, but also technical people, is the nature of the work. Like where security is at nowadays, it's all about fighting fires. It's detecting stuff, responding stuff, emergency, chaos. If it goes wrong, you're working a 24-hour shift. It's all this stress. And that's extremely, it's not just exhausting, but you're never actually improving the situation. You're constantly just managing the situation. And I think psychologically, that's exhausting. That gives you no fulfillment, no pride. You don't see like, oh, we've made changes. We've reshaped that department. We've changed those processes. Those things that happened last year, they no longer happen anywhere near as often. Now we're moving on to improve the next thing. That drives you forward. There's a sense of accomplishment. When you're like in a basement with purple LED lighting, just fighting fires day in, day out, it's soul crushing. And it's not this kind of, and I'm all for automation in those areas, because it's not stuff that we should be, we as humans should be dealing with, to be honest. And I think the other thing is a lot of people, not to go back to the main question of like, you get stuck in that place. And this is more of a leadership CISO level conversation. You've made the observation, you've made the realization that you are in the wrong position. So change it. Change it. And that's like, oh, but I report to the CIO and I can't do this or that. And that's like, okay, so go talk to the COO or CFO or CEO. Make a financial argument as to why that is. How could you save the business money? Just go up to them. And I used to do like, I still do, but one of the talks I used to do, I used to just like, people like, oh, but I can't affect that change. The problem's over there. I can't fix that. And I was like, well, okay, but I'd just pick a random person in the audience, like, you, what's your name? I'd be like, Steve? Oh, Steve, I like your watch, Steve. Steve, can I buy you a cup of coffee? I'd like to tell you something after this talk. Like, okay. No one's ever said no. Just, if you've really thought, if you're genuinely not sitting there and moaning about it, but if you've really thought about a solution, you know what, we should reorg this way. And if they did that, we wouldn't have to do that. And that would genuinely save us money. And that would make things better. And you know what, the business would be a little bit more agile and we could improve. If you can actually make those arguments and back them up and have them prepared, then yes, approach a C-level person for a cup of coffee and make them this pitch. They'll listen to you. I think people are really intimidated by this stuff. Like, I can remember, even like 10 years in, like talking to a CIO was like really, really intimidating. And now, like, last week I was, a couple of weeks ago now, I was invited to speak at a advisory board meeting for MasterCard. And it was like 2/3 of the audience were like chairmen of banks. And they're super cool people, you're just kind of chilling there with the like former prime minister of Denmark and guy wanting to introduce you to the central bank in Saudi and chill, talking about movies and this and that. Like, they're just normal people. As long as you have like don't be so intimidated. And it's funny because they tend to be really, really chill people. People think that they're really like really no. They have so much money, they don't have a care in the world. They're really happy people. They're very approachable.
And also like that it's like the complete opposite, right? It's like they're so normal, or that normalistic approach, they probably would welcome something refreshing, something a bit more exciting, or something that relates to them, because it is about them at the end of the day and their domain.
One of my favorite stories, and this is actually a very tragic story, but it's also hilarious because I have a dark sense of humor. About 3.5 years ago now, I was at an event, and it was like a business leaders event, so like senior leadership teams. And a lot of like general business questions, but also obviously some IT focus, digital transformation. And they asked a simple question about security. They asked them, what's the main reason why you guys, excos and boards, fund your cybersecurity function? And the most common answer as to why they fund their cybersecurity function was to make the security people go away.
Wow.
That's the level of disconnect between those two. When you see, like, I've seen CISOs go into boardrooms and talk about like number of firewall rules triggered.
I had a similar conversation with an acquaintance about a month ago, and they were just like 2 hours, and I think it was all endpoint information, and they're like every single person in it was like falling asleep, and it's like, and that was a CIO presenting that, so yeah.
It should be like, look, we have a lot of issues costing us a lot of money coming from bad engineering practices. I would really like to change how we do that, because that would resolve this issue and would probably also improve the quality of our code.
Yeah.
We'd have a better product. We'd have happier customers. We'd be more productive internally. And we'd probably save a bunch of money on our hosting compute costs because it would be more efficient. Oh, that sounds good. That's an exec level conversation. That's the whole conversation, by the way. That's not a summary. That's it. And they're like, yeah,
Done.
make it happen.
I know, because like the
That's all
retention
they need.
span is limited. That's all they need.
Yeah.
So
But that's little like, should we trust you? Because if we should trust you, there's no need for you to explain every minute detail.
yeah.
Like, give us an idea. That sounds good. Yes. And I actually, it's funny because part of what I want to do is help vendors. This is a bit of a tangent, but one of the examples I often give about like strategic versus truly strategic. So you have like every year you have 10,000 new vulnerabilities in your environment. And you find out through your vulnerability scanner or whatever, and some are low, medium, high, critical, some are internet facing, some from threat intelligence that they're actively being exploited. So what do? We're going to prioritize the critical ones that are internet facing. Yeah, that's clever. That's good, better than addressing the low ones. But what I do now is like, okay, great, and get your operational people to suss that out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the types of vulnerabilities, not the criticalities, the types of vulnerabilities, and be like, well, a third of these seem to be asset management issues, and a good 20% seem to be third-party patching. And why are these host names not lining up with the rest? Is there like a procurement shadow IT kind of issue here going on? And boom, I can solve three. I'm going to go tackle those three IT/business process issues. And next year, you're not going to have 10,000 vulnerabilities. You're going to have 5,000 because those problems will be solved.
Yeah.
And that's a much more effective way of doing it. And now chances are, though the root causes in build or maintenance or whatever patching process that were causing those issues, we're also causing some non-security business issues or friction. So you've solved those in the same time. And I find that by using security as a quality function, like a security defect is a thread to pull on to find a defect in a business or an IT process, you can usually justify doing the work just from the financial savings that it will generate without even looking at risk. We're all obsessed about trying to quantify risk, which I've never done right. I used to do auditing, and not a single breach company that I went into got breached by something they had in the risk register. So what's And the other really interesting thing is like, what's back to the vulnerability scanner thing. You might have a 10.0 CVE, whatever, but whatever, it came out yesterday. My operational patching is going to pick it up tonight. It's not a big deal. Like, I'm more worried about why do we have this 2.0 from 6 years ago?
Yeah.
Which only popped up last month. We have an issue somewhere where we are using old code in new applications or new builds or something. And that 2.0 symptom is actually a far more critical root cause problem, because that problem that we are using old code could result in the really severe issue that gets us breached tomorrow. So it's not about the vulnerability itself. It's you really have to ask yourself, where is it coming from?
Yeah.
And I just want to like help people. And where I started this argument was, if vendors start pushing their solutions this way, instead of the technical, the firefighting, the value prop, like it's the same solution, it's the same vulnerability management tool. But if I sell it with that narrative, I'm going to help you find your root causes and improve your processes and save you money. That is a better narrative, full stop. It's got more value. It's something I can sell to a CFO now, not just
Absolutely.
a CISO.
Yeah.
One of the examples I keep giving from a few months ago was selling a storage solution. You know, you can have two pitch or a recovery solution, right? You can have two pitches of, oh, I need an extra £1 million for, dear CFO, I need £1 million for this recovery solution because it'll help us recover faster. It's like, okay, I've been giving you, Mr. CFO, the CFO has been giving you 10 million a year for security. Now you're telling him that's not enough and you're going to get shafted anyway, so better spend another $1 million on recovery. So already his level of trust, his or her level of trust is going to be a little bit low.
Yeah.
And he's going to wonder, well, is this solution going to work? And what are the odds of us needing that solution this year? And you don't want to tell him like 50% because that means you've been doing a really bad job over there. So you said 10%. Like 10%, is that really worthwhile? 10% next year as well? Well, you know what? I'm going to give that £1 million to the marketing department because they're going to convert it into 50 million in sales, and that's better for the bottom line. And he'd be absolutely right to do that. If, however, I go to him and say, look, I would like you to invest £1 million into a recovery solution so that we can recover twice as fast, which means I can have all the risk values because we're going to recover, we'll only be down half as long, and then free up the resource from having that risk to actually fix the process issues we have that are causing all our issues, which means next year I won't need 10 million in security OpEx. I'll be down to 9, and the year after that I'll be down to 8, and the year after that I'll be down to 7. After that, it's going to be diminishing returns. So over the next 3 years, I'm going to save you 6 million, and then I'm going to save you an extra 3 million every year after that. Can I have the $1 million now? Obviously. It's a brain-dead, obvious financial proposition. It makes perfect sense. You're going to make money off it. And we haven't even talked about risk. We haven't even calculated the risk, and it's now a financial no-brainer. And the beauty of it is because you actually address the root cause of the issues, the number of things that can go wrong for which you might need the recovery solution is actually lower.
Yeah.
I think that's a really big thing where, you know, I'm not talking about abandoning your security operations because you're always going to need a level of that, but it's a bit like, you know, those Batak games where it's like those the lights that light up and like you have to kind of like, you know, your reflexes and peripheral vision. It's a bit like you go from one of those that had like 40 squares all over like that, where it's really hard to keep track of everything and you're going to miss the odd one, to one that has like 3 of them in front of your face. Well, very hard to miss those. So what's left of your security operations is far more likely to catch the things that do get through because the types of things that can get through is so much fewer because you've addressed the issues behind most of those things. So these things don't light up anymore.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk about today's sponsor, which is Vanta. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Through my experiences of using Vanta, Vanta automates compliance. It covers everything from SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and many more, saving you time and money, while helping you build customer trust. I love all the insights that it gives me, covering everything from asset management, my control failures, audit status, even vulnerabilities from other connecting systems which have been integrated into the platform. Having a centralized place for something like an ISO program has been a godsend for me. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Why Vanta? With over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Flow Health, and Quora, they all use Vanta to manage risk and provide security in real time. So, my listeners can claim a special offer of $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/decloaked. That's vanta.com/decloaked. Thanks.
So all this thing like feeds into each other. And no one's doing this stuff, you know. And you look at the trends in terms of like the absolute spending, the relative spending, they're only going up and up and up. And the actual, you know, what's the reduction in breaches? There isn't one. It's just keep going up and up. It's like all we're doing is ramping up more and more and more risk management.
Yeah.
And you look at every mature industry, aviation, automotive, oil and gas, healthcare, they address the root causes of the problem. They have very mature methodologies, like what actually caused this. Like whether it's a tired employee or an interface that was confusing or a build process or what, they address the root causes. And their incidents or defect over time rates or trends are just downward line, where you have like a residual at the end, but it's this downward line. Ours is this. Like, why would you do it that way?
Yeah.
I give the analogy of like you build an aircraft and like 2 years later, a new aircraft, and 2 years later, one of the airlines operating it, British Airways, finds that the bolts on the wings are coming loose. Oh crap, well that's bad. So what do? Well, let's build a workshop in every single airport in the world, staff it with tools and engineers, and retorque the bolts of the plane, take it out of service for an hour, retorque all the bolts on the plane to reduce the risk of the wings falling off on the next flight.
Yeah.
That's a really stupid way of doing it, isn't it? Why don't we like elevate this to the manufacturer, and they'll do an assessment of what's going wrong and redesign the parts and start building the new planes using that part and retrofit what's in the field. And then there's nothing left to risk manage. We don't even have to worry about that. Plus, we've learned a thing or two about fasteners, so we're less likely to repeat this mistake in the future. So why don't we do security that way? And I argue it, and very often it's like, one of the problems is we don't have the cost modeling in place.
Yeah, I agree.
And a lot of people argue with me, it's like, I agree with you, Greg. However, the problem doesn't originate, it originates somewhere else where I don't have control. So, okay, well, if a technician at British Airways finds a problem with a plane made by Airbus still actions it. There's a structure in place to make that happen. So if you, as a CISO, why isn't that the first thing you're putting in place? You're literally going to burn yourself out for the next 3 years?
Because you're doing all the work.
Saying, guys, this is fucking stupid. I'm going to spend 6 months and make sure that there's a structure and a financial model in place that proves the value of the structure, so that I have support from management and they agree to restructure the organization so that this can happen this way. I'm going to do that, because otherwise everything I'm doing is pointless. And I see we're never actually fixing anything, just ramping up more and more firefighting. And I remember like last year, like there were a couple companies that laid off their security teams and people were like outraged. It's like, oh, they're going to get breached immediately. I was like, well, think about that for a second. If getting rid of the SecOps team means the company's security is immediately back down to zero, or the risk levels goes back sky high, that means that team has never actually been fixing anything. They've never actually improved the inherent security of the organization. They've just been managing the fires the whole time. And that's a really bad way of doing it. And again, back to the human dimension, I think this is why people are burning out.
Yes, I mean, you can tie it back to Elon Musk when he took over Twitter, and then it was like the famous story of the server farms. And he's like, we don't need them. And they're like, nah, like it's going to take 6 months to decommission. And I think he said 6 weeks, then he said 6 days. Then him and I think 2 family members went on site on Christmas Eve and ripped the place up. And then it's a really fascinating story. I think I'll need to share the link at some point, but it's cool. But anyway, I digress. But moving on then, Greg.
It must be very stressful working for Elon. That's all I can say. Well, I think it proves the point that if you want it done, it can happen. But
yeah, exactly. So yeah, just talk me through some of the challenges you've faced within the industry. They can be personal, professional, entirely up to you.
I think everything's a challenge. I think it's important to see challenges as something to overcome. I think so often I see security people, especially those in the leadership space, get frustrated because they recognize the problem, but then they get frustrated by the problem because they're still in that headspace of my job is this. It's like, no, your job is to solve the problem. Your job, like our focus should be the outcome, and it doesn't matter how we get to the outcome. And if you see that I'm being blocked by this thing over here, which is a communication issue or whatever, then your job is now solving a communication issue.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think took me a while to figure out. And quite, you get stuck there. You get stuck there, and there's nothing you can do. And I see a lot of the more out of the box thinking people really get stuck. Like they're hit disproportionately hard by this kind of stuff. So I would strongly advise to people of just security is not playing with technology. I think this is actually one of the more fundamental problems that we have with our industry, and why it's not really delivering. Is we are mostly tech people, and I created an article about, I like coffee, but really, the question is, do I use my fancy espresso machine here? Do I go downstairs to the nice coffee shop across the street? Well, I go downstairs, but I walk right past the coffee shop. I go to the car park, I get in my car, and I drive for half an hour, and then I have a crappy Costa coffee. Why? Because I like coffee, but really it's just an excuse for me to go play with my car.
Yeah.
And if you are paying me as your coffee provider person, and at some point you're going to wonder hopefully why it takes me 2 hours to get you a crappy cold cup of coffee. Well, I'm your expert, so I'm going to have some solutions for you. Is it get a coffee right here? Is it go downstairs? No, I've got a much, much better solution that only a technical coffee expert like myself could provide. Buy me a faster Porsche. But the business doesn't want Porsches. The business just wants a cup of coffee. And, that might not make sense until you realize why are most cybersecurity people in cybersecurity? Is it because they like to solve business problems? Is it because they like to find the ideal, financially calculated outcome, risk to dollar for the business? Or is it because they really like to play with tech? And I've been in a room where we purchased $500,000 worth of firewalls over another vendor because we preferred the color of the LEDs. Okay, so and I don't want to say taking the piss, but I'm pointing out things that make people uncomfortable. But I used to be that guy. Like I know, and I think that's a challenge we need to overcome. But I think once you do, it's funny because I think a lot of people who do want to do the right thing and are very, very frustrated, their thinking is actually way higher than they realize it is. Like they're stuck at a certain level and they're frustrated because they can't progress. But the fact is, like, you're trying to solve problems. Like you're trying to be altruistic to business. You're really trying to drive outcomes. And you are reporting to a middle or upper manager who doesn't, So what you actually need to do is go read a whole bunch of business books, because you need to round yourself out. You need to round the rest of you up to that level. And then you go to that, truly senior executive level, and you'd actually be surprised. You get traction there, because they're the people that care about the outcome. When your CEO, when like 95% of his compensation is your share price or your EBITDA or your margins or your gross or net revenue, and you can find ways of cutting cost or driving revenue, they're going to listen to you.
Yeah.
As opposed to, the CISO or CIO who just gets paid a salary, and his value is how many people and how much budget he has.
Yeah. And comes to the table with lots of problems that are about technology when the CEO doesn't give a shit about it. And just when you mentioned books, what's been the best book that you've read recently that's helped you articulate the security translation or the kind of business dynamic?
It's funny because I speak, especially when I do like public speaking or board and stuff, and customers as well. Like I speak like exclusively in analogies. So I'm obviously going to pitch my 2 books, Rethinking InfoSec.
Of course. We'll stick some links. I'm putting the fingers here.
But you'll see, like, it's just full of analogies. Like my slides are about, security is like keeping a ship afloat. It's the plane analogy. It's the stop feeding the mice, because, for all this hype of the threat ecosystems, like, well, if I put a bag of grain in my front garden, I'm not going to be surprised that I have a bunch of mice afterwards. The solution is not to buy 10,000 mouse traps. It's to take the grain away. The grains being your vulnerabilities, because that's what attracts the attackers. The bad attack. It's all just kind of analogies. It's really, really, really simple. But I talk a lot about security being a quality function. And if you investigate the principles of quality, where you invest in addressing root causes and the return you get on that. And a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago now, I read The Toyota Way, and actually did a post like, this is the best security book I've ever read. It has absolutely nothing to do with security. I contacted the author, and he was like, oh, that's a novel implementation for my book. Yeah. But the principles are there, like you can create financial models, proving to the business that building stuff right is the better way of doing it. It doesn't just reduce risks, it reduces costs, it reduces your compute bills, it increases your agility, it makes it easier to change code, it makes it easier to charge for customer requests because you can deliver them for less cost. All this stuff makes tremendous sense. So you got these 14 quality principles. I think if you start adopting those, and the problem is, like, you as a security person, you typically can't, but you have to start building the business case to it. So I think like financial modeling, I think like any kind of mini MBA is a really good place to go. And I find like the more departments you work with, learn about engineering, learn about how a legal or HR department operate. The more you know about them, the more they'll welcome you in. They'll be impressed that you actually understand how they operate. And I've noticed in the communication, like for years now, I've always favored the business money argument over the risk argument, because it's just more convincing and it's tangible. Because the risk, let's be honest, is mostly made up. And I dare anyone who's just started lowering risks before an audit to make it look like we made progress to argue with me. But even just speaking the lingo makes a huge difference. Like if I can send like this is a very recent discovery that a guy called Vanta put me onto. If I send a memo or an email to a CFO, it's like, look, I think I can save some money here. I think I can free up or create some opportunity there. I might reply to it. But if I use the words like, I can improve this quarter's EBITDA, or, impact to quarterly EBITDA, that's the title of the email. That person is reading that email, because that for them is like super relevant. That's something I work on the report like 3 months out of the year. Just using their buzzwords.
It's all about marketing.
Really get you a lot of traction. And like, I'm at a point where I don't touch technology anymore. Like I'm just coming in to try to point out the issues, work out what would be best, create the structures that enable all the other stuff, right? Yeah, that's it.
I like that framing of it. I think that psychologically hits harder than anything else. Or dumping an Excel spreadsheet on someone and they're like, what is this report? And it's got 60,000 pie charts, and it's like, no. But if you have a hard-hitting email with relevant context to them, then it's obviously going to get looked at. So excellent.
Like, most of these departments have like a report or a something that they, or 2 or 3 of them that are very, very important, that they're working all the time. Like they're always working on like, the quarterly numbers of this or that report, the compliance report. By leveraging their focus on those things, you can get traction. But you need to understand them. I think that's a huge issue that we have in security. Like, we don't understand the businesses that we are supposed to be protecting, and as a result, we cannot protect them. I think a big issue is even on the kind of technical side. How many security functions? I say like security knows a little bit about the IT function and maybe a little bit about the engineering function, but very little about the rest of the business. I like to give an example. How many security functions even know how the IT help desk operates, what their function is, what kind of information, accounts and stuff they're giving out, and how they vet and validate? Most security teams don't have a clue. And how many breaches do we see where people get handed credentials out of an IT help desk? Or police services in Northern Ireland a couple of years ago, where they released a file, but it had a tab in the Excel file that had all the raw data. So, well, that's a place where obviously there's a high likelihood of important data, leaking out. So that's a place where you should have a control in place. How one of the great ones was an airport group, and they were telling me giving this example, the conveyor belts that do the luggage. The infrastructure guy was explaining to me, like, everything from like the parking entrances to the gates boards that direct. He was like, that's the most critical system in an airport, is the boards that tell you to go to your gates. Because I was given a wrong gate number last week and I missed my flight. Could you imagine everyone's gate numbers being wrong?
Yeah.
It would be pandemonium. But he mentioned the conveyor belts that do the luggage. They never break down because they are monitored electronically for the voltage on the motors. When the voltage goes a little bit erratic, they know that motor is on the fritz.
Yeah.
And so outside of business hours, they will replace it. So during business hours, those things will never, ever, ever break down. How do you monitor these? Oh, we have this third-party industrial hardware company that has a connection into our internal network behind the firewall. All right, so this company have any kind of cybersecurity credentials whatsoever? Oh no, they're just dealing industrial machinery. Okay. Does your security team know that they have this direct connection into your airside network? So everything, congratulations, you've got a fish tank and you've plugged 99 out of the 100 holes. It's that, and I think so much of, and this is my biggest advice for like setting up security programs. Forget NIST, forget ISO, because they will not know, those standards know absolutely nothing about all these parts of your business. If you want a security program that is actually going to keep your business secure, you need to systematically go through every department, every business process, every role, and define what good looks like for those things. A, so you know about them, and B, so you know they're being done in a way that doesn't introduce all these unnecessary risks. By systematically going over that, through that process, which will take you 3 to 5 years, you will dramatically reduce the amount of risks that you introduce, and you will at least be aware of all the ones that you have, because chances are you won't. Because we see more and more of these, like I said, like it's never the risk they're taking into account on the risk register that gets them breached. If you don't know what's going on, what's the point?
Yeah. Insight is key. And then the kind of next topic I wanted to cover then, Greg, was the one thing in the industry you think needs clarity or any relevance. I'm assuming you'll have lots of topics, but yeah, give me one topic you think needs relevant focus. Yeah.
I just keep going back to the same thing. Like we have to stop being so technically myopic. We have to start looking at security as an outcomes thing. I give the analogy of a ship. Like securing an organization is a bit like keeping a ship afloat. You have the threats, you have the water always putting pressure on the hull, and if there's a gap in there, it's going to find it, it's going to get in. But that's fine. That's why we have bilge pumps on ships, which is basically your security operations or your security function. They're there to pump out that excess bit of water that gets in from time to time. But if you have gaps this big in your hull with millions of gallons coming in, no bilge pump in the world is going to do that. It's not security's job to keep the organization secure. I can take a tower block and fill it with thousands and thousands of bilge pumps, dump it in the ocean. It's not going to float.
Yeah.
That's okay, because it's not the bilge pump's job to keep it afloat. It's the ship's job. The entire organization, how it's structured, the materials, the bonds, the compartments, the processes, all that stuff has to be thought out for it to be a ship. And we have to design our organizations the same way. And I think that's the biggest role of security. Yes, you have your security operations, but the biggest role of security is defining what good and what secure looks like for every given department, business process, that kind of thing. Because unless you do that, there's no amount of technical mitigation that will ever keep up with that. And that's the trends that we're seeing. We're spending more, but the breaches are like that. It's just never going to happen. I think the other issue I'd like to raise, the biggest issue I see, we talk a lot about the skills gap. I think the biggest skills gap in cybersecurity is leadership. It's not a bodies one. It's not even a techies one. We are consuming techies at a monstrous rate because we're not addressing the issues that causes so many of the technical problems. Here again, I've got an analogy of car factory where basically the cars go through the assembly line and then they get pushed into the car park to be sold, but they get pushed from the 3rd floor, so the cars are mangled up. So every 30 seconds, we set up a little workshop, we get some people in, we assess the damage, what tools do we need, what parts do need to be taken out, put back in, what's the process, what's good enough, let's get some auditors in to, let's create a framework and some auditors to get stick to it, some consultants to help us work better, some vendors to sell us better tools, and every 30 seconds another car, and we can't keep up, and next thing you know, you got 10,000 people in this car park. And another hiring things, I love to hire relatively non-technical people that have different backgrounds, that haven't been indoctrinated in this security status quo, and they'll sit at the edge of that car park and they'll feel incredibly intimidated because look at all this technical advanced work and we don't know how to do those things and how to manage those tools, and they don't understand this framework, and they feel incredibly stupid. Why did you hire us, Greg? And then eventually I just let them sit there, and they asked me a stupid question. They're like, why are we dropping the cars from the 3rd floor though? It's like, well, because these guys are unable to have a business conversation with those guys and argue that maybe it would make sense and be cheaper. What? Yeah, please go do that. And voila, we've built a ramp now, or we've changed the order of the assembly line, and we're no longer dumping cars, and you don't need those people, and 90% of those techies can go home. And that's really the situation we're in. So I think we need, that's more of a strategic one. And the other side, I did a whole post about like 10 reasons why hiring is so hard. It's not. I've never used HR. I've never used a recruiter. I found people, really good people like that. But part of the problem is I think a lot of us in security, a lot of the managers in security are basically techies that have worked themselves up to be lead techie, and therefore you're now a manager. That doesn't necessarily mean they have good management skills, and it definitely doesn't mean they have good people and leadership skills. I'll have people on the phone for 20 minutes and just make them a job offer. I've not seen the resume. I believe in your potential. I think potential is something that's very important to look at. It really rubs me the wrong way. I feel like it's quieted down a bit, but I remember like a year or two ago, there was so much talk about diversity in cyber. Oh, we need more diversity. Diverse people help us solve diverse problems. Okay, so why are you indoctrinating them all to work the exact same way before you let them have a job?
Very true.
Yeah. Whereas, different backgrounds will give you, and I think the correct way of doing that is figuring out where these people can contribute, because not everything is a tech problem. So that already opens up the options tremendously. And the other one is to look at potential, because I think potential is the great equalizer. Because you might have someone from a different ethnicity or background, something that just didn't have as much opportunity as you. But if you judge them on their potential rather than what they've done, then that changes that. And I think we've got this, because we tend to be not good leaders, poor judges of characters, we're scared of hiring people for something they haven't done before. Like, we only trust the people that have already done this, which I think is a failure on our part. Because I'd much rather get the person I need them to do this, they're here, but I can see that they're going to clearly be up here. And if they've done this, they're going to keep going. That's going to be a phenomenal person who's just going to keep growing and growing and growing, as opposed to the guy riding a desk 9 to 5, who's going to stay there and do the bare minimum. And yet that person is more likely to get hired. So I think that's a bit backwards. So I think we have a lot of issues around leadership, communication, being good to your people, mentoring, and just generally having a bigger vision of the problem beyond just the tech. Like, we have to look at the outcomes.
I love that. And then to conclude, I always ask this question: is the one thing in cyber you think is BS and needs to change or needs a focus? So I'm sure, as a very opinionated person, yeah.
I think the skills gap is BS. I think a lot of the emerging technologies are a bit BS. Some of them are valid, but they don't address, they're not being leveraged optimally. Like, for example, I'd love to see, like, AI, I think is hilarious because there's very little I about it. But it does work very, very well in like niche applications. And I'd love to see it used for stuff like cleaning up code. That would, if we use AI, because it's a very niche thing, look at this code and give me the same outcome in the leanest way possible. That's something an AI could learn very easily and do very, very well. And that would solve us a lot of problems, reduce, code risk and deficiencies a lot. It would streamline code. It would save business so much money. Like, the amount of money companies are spending on cloud compute costs is insane, and it's skyrocketing because of
it's only going to get worse.
Yeah. So I think that's an application where it would be fantastic. But we're not using it, and we're using all these security technologies that they provide such great insights for, like, they give you a thread to pull on to find those root causes, but instead we're using them just to look at the fire at the minute. And we really need to get our headspace and sometimes just let it burn. Literally every single minute you are spending doing cyber is a minute you are not spending solving the problem that caused you to have that cyber issue. So I think we need to prioritize a bit, and I think we need to be more altruistic to the businesses, because businesses hire us so they can make more money or keep more money. but we do very little of that, and quite often, quite frankly, we are trying to get as much money as we can out of the business without really thinking what we give in return.
I like it. And then to conclude, thanks very much for your time, Greg. It's been enlightening. Lots of useful information, clear advice, the ups and downs. I think we've covered every single topic. And it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you again, Greg. And as I always say to everyone, like, share, subscribe, and all the jargon that comes with YouTube, I guess. And again, Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thanks so much for your time.
Cheers. Yeah, give me a follow. I'm happy to help where I can.